Hello and welcome to Messed Up to Setups. I'm Michael Halcomb. Today I'm with comedian Drew Davis. I'm really looking forward to this.
It's all messed up, yeah. Everything's messed up. We're going from this mess up to the next setup. Everything seems so messed up, but it's just our setup.
Drew, it's good to see you, man. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good, Michael. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I love the name "Messed Up to Setup" because I feel I can hit both parameters on that one pretty well. So this is exciting. It's exciting to be here.
Exactly. Yeah, the name is interesting. I'm thinking sort of just about, what is the comic persona? What is my voice? Where does my comedy come from? And, I looked at all this messed up stuff in my life or around me, and that provides the best material for the setup.
Well, it's so people don't want to hear about your perfect good life when you're on stage. The more messed up stuff you have to share, the more into it we're gonna be.
Yeah. So here's Drew's site, drewdaviscomedy.com. Always want to plug that. He's got videos up here, shows, press, biography, testimonials, Clean Comedy Collective. That's pretty cool thing he's got going on there. So his podcasts, his QME, Quarter Mile Entertainment. He's got a lot of stuff going on, and he's on all the platforms. So make sure you follow him. Let's see. We'll share the, what is it? Is this a link tree? Yeah.
We'll pick up my link tree. That you can follow me on all your whichever thing you use: Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. I'm there. So
yes,
Instagram's my favorite, but I know that people all have their preferred ones. So
yeah, I had built, so I'd done photography for a while. This is a hobby, kind of like amateurish professional photography, and I built a handle called Aloha Outsider, and I spent about a year growing that, and I got it up to about 12,000, and then I was just like, this is taking too much time and energy, and I just let it sit. It's still sitting at like 12,000, but that was like 4 years ago, and I just recently started this Instagram handle for comedy, and I'm like, I feel like I'm learning a new language, dude. Just in 4 years, like
yeah, it's something else. It's having an online presence is so important for what we do, and it's not always the most fun. But it is what it is. It's great when it's great, and then it's just a real drag when it's not. But that's just life, man. I guess. I might have just gotten deconnected.
So check out drewdaviscomedy.com. Lots of stuff going on there, and you can connect with Drew in all those places. But yeah, you're right. When it's going well, it's going well. But dude, creating all that content and then just curating each platform, you could easily hire somebody to do that as a full-time job, promoter or marketer or whatever. Yeah, I wanted to, and for those of you watching and listening, we're going to do two parts here. The first part is we're just going to hear about Drew's journey into comedy, which is pretty interesting because we have some cool parallels here. And then in part two of this, what I'm doing with all the comedians who come on is I have them share a joke and sort of the genesis and evolution of that joke. And then we actually do some making up of jokes on the spot. But in this segment, we're going to just hear from Drew and about his journey into comedy. So where did that start? Where did the idea, I should think about pursuing comedy come from?
Yeah, so I have enjoyed comedy, I'd say, since middle school. I have memories of study hall, middle school, listening to some stand-ups with some friends, during class, honestly. And so it's always been kind of something I'd like. And also something we have in common is a preaching background. I started preaching when I was 16. Before I was a comedian, I was a full-time youth pastor. And so a common and weird statement people used to always say to me was, hey, after a sermon, they'd be like, hey, if preaching doesn't work, you should totally try stand-up comedy, because I would incorporate stories or illustrations. And I don't know if that was their way of saying you're really funny or this, you're not great at preaching. I don't know. But so that was something I heard all the time. And then when I was about 24, I was working at my first church out of college, and I kind of had this realization that everyone around me was like exactly the same. They were all kind of in the Christian bubble. I had been in the Christian bubble all throughout college and a lot of in high school as well. And I was just, looking at it from a Christian perspective, I was thinking like, man, if I'm supposed to go out and make disciples, everyone around me is fine. Like there's no going out that I'm doing because everyone's just older, younger versions of myself. But also from like just another perspective, I was looking for kind of meeting different people and doing something different than just church and ministry work. And I'd always loved comedy, so I was living near Lexington, Kentucky at the time, and so I went and I tried an open mic there at their comedy club, Broadway Comedy Club in Lexington, and I did it one time and absolutely fell in love with it. And then I got to do it another time a month later at the same club, and then I moved back to Nashville shortly after that. And that's when I really got plugged into comedy and really hit the scene and started traveling and just started learning the whole open mic comedy scene to traveling comedy. It went from just a fun recreational thing, a creative outlet really, to a side hustle that I was doing while I was, either working retail or working ministry jobs again. And then 2.5 years ago, I decided I finally gave myself permission. It's a process for anyone who ever wants to become a full-time comedian. But I think the start of that process is you give yourself permission where you can say, this is what I want to do with my life. I know it's crazy. I know it's maybe a little reckless, but I want to be a full-time comedian. And I say give yourself permission because there are so many reasons people should never have a career in entertainment. In so many ways it's a bad idea, but for the people that end up doing it, it's like you can't not do it, and you finally have to just be okay with that for yourself. So, and then what's kind of fun is in a couple of weeks, so this all started about 12 years ago for me. In a couple of weeks, I'll actually be returning to Lexington to the same place that I got to do a couple open mics, right? Like we're talking very beginning. And I'm going back to feature for a weekend for their comedy club. So awesome. I will literally be in the same place that I started comedy, 12 years ago. So that's kind of cool.
Congrats on that. Let's back up a little bit.
Yeah.
So you talked about in middle school, so how old are you?
I'm 30. I'm 37. So,
all right. So you're born in like the mid 80s.
Yep. 87. I don't remember much of the 80s. I was a 90s child, 90s, early 2000s. My music taste is absolutely early 2000s punk rock. That's my vibe. So
were you were you like on the tail end of like the Adam Sandler, Chris Farley, all that, or that already passed, or what?
I was a little bit past that. So the first comedians I ever listened to, like I remember listening to their CDs back when those were a relevant thing.
Yep.
Dane Cook, Mitch Hedberg, Brian Regan. Those were probably the first three that I ever heard. And in college, I kind of really got a lot deeper into it. Jim Gaffigan was and still is like my absolute favorite. And that was kind of when he was starting to kind of become more relevant. And nowadays, again, Jim Gaffigan's still top notch for me, but I also like John Mulaney, Mike Birbiglia, Pete Holmes, a lot of white guys. I like other comedians as well, but I must confess, if we're talking a list of top 5, the Mount Rushmore of my comedy, it's going to look very white.
That is what it is. Yeah, I think that's an interesting. I did a post about that, my Mount Rushmore comedy recently. And
who are yours? I don't know if I saw that post.
I would have Kevin Nealon up there from Saturday Night Live fame. I would have Dimitri Martin.
Oh, he's good.
Yeah, I love Dimitri Martin. Probably Nate Bargatze.
Mm-hmm. He's good too.
And then like my fourth one, I sort of flip flop a lot. So Adam Sandler would be one. I don't know. I really like Ricky Gervais.
Yeah, he's good. I love Adam Sandler's career. I love how he's got the Saturday Night Live, he's got his stand-up, but he's also got a wonderful film career. He's been serious and comedy. And also one of the things that I love is that like he's found ways to incorporate his friends into his work. Like he's helped his friends. Yes. I mean, like that's the dream, is to be able to, do what you love and then have the people that also kind of are in your same circle and have them around you as well too.
Yeah.
So
that to me is like one of the most admirable things about him. And I noticed, Nate Bargatze's sort of doing the same thing. He's bringing everybody that's come up with him, and he's bringing them up with him. And
in August, I had an opportunity to do one of his Nateland shows. So that right now they have a Nateland. I always mix them up because they have a weekly clean show, which I think is just called the Nateland Showcase here in Nashville. But they also have like where comedians get like mini YouTube specials, and I think that's called Nateland Presents. And so I got to do an untelevised spot on that, kind of just like a warm up act, and it was really cool though because I got to kind of see how his organization works. I mean, just and they were just so nice, so encouraging, so friendly. Just a real. It was exactly what you'd expect when you watch his stand up, if that makes sense. Like if
right.
like he's kind of got that nice chill vibe, but also friendly and professional, and like it was like that just across the board with the production people, with the comedians on set. Like it was a really fun experience. So I hope to get to work with them again sometime down the line.
It's refreshing to hear that because even I've only been in this a little over a year now, and you already start to see and hear the sort of competitive, like the vicious competitive. And you know, I'm not gonna say names because I don't want to get torched right now.
Yeah, let's not do that. Let's not get canceled on this podcast, Michael.
There's just debates going around right now that seem so pointless to me among, you know, in certain comedy circles of people just like torching each other, and I'm just like, what's the point? Like,
yeah,
so I
well,
look at Sandler. Go ahead.
It's very comedy itself, and Jerry Seinfeld has a quote about this. I heard him say on a podcast, and he's probably said it on multiple podcasts, where, you know, he talks about how comedy is a tough industry, entertainment's a tough industry, and there's some very toxic and rough elements to it, and oftentimes people will get weeded out because it's such a hard industry that, right, you know, you go to an open mic, you see a ton of people, whether they're rude or not funny or like whatever the situation is. Like back when I first started, that might have been something that would have bothered me, just seeing like a lot of those people. But now the reality is I realize if they're going to stick it out in comedy, they'll either get better or get left behind. And so that kind of stuff doesn't bother me as much. And Jerry Seinfeld hit the nail on the head. He's like, it's a very toxic competitive industry once you get to a certain level. But I think in certain factors, it doesn't have to be as toxic or as meanly competitive. I mean, there is a simple truth that in most shows, there's only one headliner. It is competitive because there's way more comedians than there are spots open at clubs and stuff like that. And it kind of needs to be competitive a little bit, and that helps us get better and be better. But some of the toxic and not healthy, mean-natured stuff of it, it doesn't have to be that way. And I like you know, we were referencing Nate Bargatze and his comedy group. They do things in a way that are a little bit less mean and toxic, which is really cool. And that's bringing a good light here in the Nashville comedy scene. And with the Clean Comedy Collective and my brand Quarter Mile podcast, one of my big things is kind of uplifting value of the performers I work with, creating a non-toxic, a friendly, a chill. I mean, it's a little things, really small things. One day maybe it'll be bigger if we grow, but like even as simple as, you know, when we run open mics or when you have shows, the hosts, like I tell them, you have to be encouraging, you have to be friendly. It's not, we don't, you know, crap on other comedians. Like, there's a style of hosting that just makes it a more pleasant, positive way. But people come to our shows and they're like, wow, this was a lot more encouraging than usual. And it's intentional.
Yeah. So your story parallels mine too. I mean, when I was in school, I was obsessed with comedy, listening to comedians. I grew up in that SNL when it was probably at its peak with Adam Sandler, Chris Farley, David Spade.
Absolutely.
You know, those guys were killing it. And then, you know, following that, Mitch Hedberg, I wore his CD out. You know. And then like, here's the thing, like, you know, I had this obsession with comedy, but nobody ever told me it was an option or relayed the idea that it was an option. I can't imagine, you know, looking back, going to like my high school guidance counselor when we had to like tell him, what do you want to do? You know, what kind of career, and saying I want to be a stand-up comedian. Like nobody would have ever taken that serious.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and I had never even heard of like schools for the performing arts kind of thing. I didn't even know those existed until later in life. And I couldn't have gone to one anyways, just based on where I was raised and, you know, the financial situation. So it's much later in life that I'm getting into comedy. But so I ended up going into ministry. I went to a Bible college and ended up in ministry. And how did that happen for you? How did you end up in going into ministry?
Yeah, so I became a Christian about eighth grade-ish, and about the same time I received my calling to go into ministry. So that was kind of something I'd always known that was going to be part of my life. And then, so similar to you, I went to a Christian, I guess technically, if we want to get specific, it wasn't a Bible college, it was a Christian liberal arts college, but I feel like there was a lot of parallels with Bible college, with where I went as well. And so that's where I got my undergrad, and I worked in ministry while I was in college. I actually got my first ministry job at 19, which is like way too young, but they knew they could pay a college student hardly anything, and I was over there thinking I was like I'm just so awesome, I'm a prodigy, that's why they want me, but really they want me because I was a cheap hire, and that's okay. So I started ministry when I was 19 at college, and then I worked in Kentucky for a little bit, took a bit of a break, and then I actually got connected to a program that gave me a full ride to seminary, moved me to West Tennessee, and I worked at a church there for about 6 years, 3 years with the program, and then 3 extra years. And so yeah, so that, but one thing that I am pretty proud of is, and I'm sure you know a lot of people like this too, a lot of people who get burned out in ministry, a lot of people who maybe they get called out of ministry. It's once you're somewhere, it's comfortable. Once you're in your career, it's comfortable, and sometimes we don't listen to God because we're comfortable with where we are. And I know the first time it was kind of time for me to leave ministry for a little bit, I resisted it because it was all I knew and everything I was comfortable with. The lack of job security kind of freaked me out, and I stuck into it a little bit longer than I should have. But the second time, when I was being called out of ministry and into full-time comedy, I recognized the signs, and I'm really proud of how, between myself and the church that I worked with, how we transitioned me out. And now I can look back. And when I look at my time in ministry, I don't feel burned out. I don't feel angry. I don't feel like I don't even feel like I miss it or I ended too soon or whatever. I look back like you look at a really good TV show that ended at the right time. That's what I feel like. I feel like I had a good season in ministry, and I'm proud of the fact that I was able to like leave when I left and how we did it. So I think that's one of the hardest parts about being a pastor, is like leaving a church, whether it's on good terms or bad terms. There's like no good way to leave a church. Like no one takes it well. Like it just like there's no, even if you're like, I'm doing what God wants me to do, everyone still takes it as you're leaving us. And so but I do feel like the way I left, and it's not just my own decisions and how I did it, but like the people around and the staff and the church I worked at. But like I just felt like it went as good as it possibly could.
That's rare. I mean, I'm connected with tons of people I went to college with and went into ministry, and it ended just terribly. And in my own experience, pretty much every ministry I've been a part of, which is half a dozen at least, have ended on a rocky note or some kind of turmoil or trauma, or just a way you don't want it to end. No matter how hard you try to do things the right way, or to land the plane in a smooth way, like it's almost like there's a built-in resistance to that.
Right.
And
there's a lot of factors that make it hard.
I will that for you.
A lot of times people ask me because I still am pretty outspokenly Christian in what I do, and I don't label myself as a Christian comedian because I think that puts up some barriers that I don't want to put up. Not just limits works, but limit rooms that I'll go to and stuff like that as performer. And one of the biggest reasons I got into comedy was to get out of the Christian bubble, and that's still very important to me. But I am outspoken to where like faith is important to me, and I'm grateful for the time that I got to be a pastor.
And like, that it's so true that the bubble. I mean, just in the last week, I've done 4 performances. I got another one tomorrow night, so
nice.
It'll be basically 5 performances so far this year already. And I'll tell you what, the crowd that I've been around is completely different. Completely, I mean, night and day different than what I've been around the last 2 decades or whatever.
Yeah.
People I would have never ever crossed paths with, or our circles would have never overlapped. And I've seen more drinking, more drugs, heard more vulgarity in the last like few weeks than I have probably in the previous 2 decades combined. But
yeah, well, what's funny is when I first started doing comedy, my attitude was, and I don't think it was a bad attitude, but I do think I've changed my perspective a little bit, a decade later. But when I first started going to comedy, and I was coming at it as a youth pastor, I was doing youth ministry and comedy. My attitude was I was going to go into these kind of rooms and be like the light, be the good Christian example, and kind of just, lead by example. I wasn't going to preach to people. In fact, I didn't mention Christianity until in my act till like 3 years into performing, actually. But my attitude was like, oh, I'm going to go to these places and be a light. And I feel like I've done that a little bit, but I can honestly tell you, in the past decade, the people I've met and the places I've been and the experiences I've had in these, not Christian rooms have actually helped me be a better Christian. The things I've learned in comedy really taught me how to love people better, which is a pretty big deal in Christianity. Comedy really taught me to be more tolerant, to be more understanding, to be more accepting. I have all kinds of ideas for books that I don't know if I'll ever get down to writing, but where I relate things you learn in comedy to how to be a good Christian, because there's just so many. And then I had the opportunity to go back into ministry while I was still doing comedy after having done comedy for a while. And I honestly think I was a better pastor because of the things I learned as a comedian, which when I got into it, I thought I was going to be the exact opposite. But I was also what a lot of people would consider a messier pastor. Because when you get plugged into ministry, when you get plugged into comedy, you meet a lot of people that are what the church would think is very dirty, very imperfect, very flawed. The kinds of people that churches often don't love seeing in their churches, even if they're willing to admit it or not. It makes them uncomfortable. And I developed a heart for those people. And then my ministries started looking for those people. And oftentimes it made the rest of the church uncomfortable.
This is really interesting. We don't have to keep going on about faith.
Yeah, sorry.
No,
sorry.
No.
I don't want... We could talk more about comedy if you want. That's also a good thing.
No, I'm down to do it. I just don't want you to feel like you have to. If you're, it's interesting, dude. Like, I've some of that same mentality that you discussing, like being the light. I've had those thoughts too. But what's really fascinating is just like in the last 2 months, I've had 2 people at comedy shows ask me to pray for them.
Yeah, isn't that wonderful when that happens?
Dude, it's amazing. Yeah, the first time I came down off stage and a guy literally came out of the audience, ran to me, stopped me at the club door, and was like, "Hey, I'm going through a divorce. I'm worried about this. I got this going on and this. Would you just pray for me?" And it was really cool. And then just a couple nights ago, same thing. Someone said, "Hey, man, can we pray?" That isn't like by being overtly Christian or anything like that. I didn't mention in my act a couple nights ago that I was a Christian, but that happened at a table after the show.
Yeah.
So it's pretty fascinating. So you mentioned that you gave yourself permission, and I'm curious to hear, where did that idea come from, that you needed to do that?
Yeah, so I would say for longer than I might have even been aware of, I've wanted to be a comedian or an entertainer, a performer. I mean, in high school, I did a lot of music-related things during the summers with friends. I was in a traveling punk rock praise and worship band, which was super fun. But I've always been I've loved preaching, but coming with that is I love speaking in front of people.
Right.
But I've grown up in America like you did, where job security is a big thing, making sure you're taken care of, making sure you're making good financial decisions. Never in my life, similar to what you were saying, no one's ever been like, "Hey, you should pursue entertainment," because your parents are never going to say that when growing up, because they don't. That's like they're saying you should pursue being poor for the rest of your life. You should pursue not having regular work frequently. There were all kinds of voices that I was listening to, whether it was society, whether it was my own parents, whether it was my own voice telling me like, this is a bad idea. Like I should have a responsible, reasonable job. Comedy's good for a side hustle or recreate, but it's not like a quote unquote real job. They're just, the more I got into it, the more internally I knew this is what I need to be doing. And then kind of at the end of COVID, I say at the end of COVID, that's so weird because no one really knows when it ended or if it's still going on or what the deal is. So I can say finally about like 2021, 2022, when things were lightening up a little bit, my job was still mostly virtual. We weren't doing a lot of in-house ministry stuff, in-person ministry stuff. So I took that opportunity to start traveling a little bit more with comedy, because there was a unique time where like everyone, doors were opening back up, but comedians were still staying in. So I was like, ooh, that can give me a chance to get jobs that I might not normally get because of the competition. So I gave myself a week to do a little bit of a tour. I did the World Series of Comedy. I did a show in some random basement in Indiana. I did a show in in the bed of a pickup truck in Chicago at a dog park. I did a show there. Just all these really weird, different gigs. And at the same time, I was feeling like I was feeling the urge that, okay, it's time to transition into something. At the time I was thinking a ministry transition, so I was applying for some different jobs. I was getting polite no thank yous from the people I was applying for, and then I remember I was on a phone call with my mom, and I said it out loud, and it like was the first time I'd ever said it. I was like, whatever job I get, I would rather be doing comedy. When I was in Indiana doing the show at some random basement, the headliner was a friend of mine from Nashville who I hadn't seen forever. We didn't know we were on the same show together, and then we had lunch beforehand, and I was just telling him, or excuse me, we had dinner beforehand. I was just telling him, man, I have missed this so much. I love doing this. Has been the best week ever. I mean, like this, I forgot how great this is. And then during his act, he was headlining that night. During his act, he mentioned something about like, yeah, I'm 35 and a full-time comedian. And that's when I had like the Holy Spirit hit, where it was like, in a year from now, when I'm 35, I'm going to be doing this full time. And it was just, for whatever reason, I was finally able to accept, this is what I want to do with my life. This is what I feel called to do with my life. This is where everything seems to be leading to. And then I still gave myself a year of praying. I still gave myself a year talking it over with people, transitioning, making a game plan. I don't want people to think I just dropped everything and left, right. I mean, there's still responsible decision making, because the longer you do comedy, you see the risks of living that kind of lifestyle of a professional comedian, but you also start seeing how it's like a calculated risk. You start seeing, I mean, for me, a slight factor was, I went from always thinking Netflix specials were so cool and loving them and watching them all the time, to years down the line, I started recognizing some of the people with their Netflix specials. And it kind of hit me like, well, if they can have it, why can't I? I have phone numbers of some of these people on Netflix. It became more of achievable goal, and so I don't know, like for everyone who's ever considering any kind of job in entertainment or creative, I mean, there are sacrifices. It's like anything else. There are challenges, but you can do it. It is possible. It's like anything else. You learn the ropes and you figure it out,
Do you think, let me ask you this, and then we'll transition out of part one here into part two, but I'm really curious as your opinion on this. It feels or seems, looks, whatever word we want to use there, to me, at least like in the last year or two, there seems to be maybe an oversaturation of specials. Are you noticing this? Am I just like totally off totally off base here? Like,
I think you're right. I think, and I don't know if maybe it's been the past couple of years, maybe it's been longer than that, but there does seem to be a lot more specials out there. And I don't know, there's probably a lot of reasons why. I know one of the biggest reasons would be more people are watching comedy from the luxury of their own home right now. So this is maybe financially and getting your audience wise, maybe it makes more sense to have them out there. I think a byproduct that we shouldn't be proud of that's happening is the specials are becoming less good. Like, I remember, I love watching Netflix specials, and so I'll reference them, and I'll also reference Dry Bar, because Dry Bar has a lot of specials too. When Netflix first came out, or when Dry Bar first came out, there were less specials and less frequent specials, and I felt like every single one of them were good. Like it felt like they were really good. And I don't mean any disrespect to any of the comedians here, but like now it seems like you could watch a lot of those specials on Dry Bar or Netflix and they don't hold as much weight. And I think those comedians would agree with me when they say like they could have waited longer, honed those jokes better, and then put it out there later, and it would have been good. I feel that I kind of had some internal pressure to put out my second special, which is independently done. It's not on any of those platforms, but it is on YouTube. And when I watched the first one, and then when I watched the second one, technically I'm better in the second one. But I look at the first one was like 7 years worth of progress.
Right.
And I feel for that point, I was pretty good for that special. When I watched the second one, which was filmed a few years later in 2023, the first one's 2019, it's not terrible, but even the point I released it, from when I recorded it, I had already started doing those jokes better than what's on the recording. But like I felt internal. It was, no one was pressuring me, but I felt the pressure to put something out there to kind of let the world know I was back into comedy. And you know what? If I ever got a chance to do like a Netflix or a Dry Bar or something like that, I would probably do a lot of those similar jokes, and I'd probably take down that one because I'd have a better. Then this past year I posted a video of newer jokes, a different 30 minutes from the first two, but just where I'm at now, it was like so much better than the second special. So like a lot of people, I have 2 official released ones and one that's not official, but a lot of people will tell you the not official one is better.
You know, like I think one part of it is these big platforms have figured out that producing a one-man, one-woman comedy show costs them peanuts compared to like producing a movie or a TV show or something like that, right? So really, I mean, they could make these, you know, assembly line kind of thing, and it's going to make the company money.
Yeah.
I think that's another aspect of it.
And most companies don't care about the quality of content. You're going to pay to get the content, and then whether you watch it a billion times or watch it just once or watch even just part of it, you've already paid for it. And that's something in creative endeavors, whether it's comedy, music, that's something we got to watch out for, because we're in the age that tells us you need to be posted. If you really wanted to try to go viral on social media, on TikTok, on Instagram, what the internet will tell you is to post 3 times a day, every single day until you blow up. And if you do that, because I spent about a year and a half posting every single day. And what I came to realize was I started really hating all the posts I was putting out there. They're all old comedy videos. I didn't have enough good content, so I started posting the bad content. And I ended up archiving half of it, more than half of it, because I was like, it's just not good stuff. I think I always tell people, like, if you can post lots of good content frequently, then that's a way to build your online presence. But for me personally, it should be, you should prioritize posting good content versus posting a lot of content. But I also know that that's like against what succeeds. I mean, YouTube, if you post every day, your stuff will grow.
Yeah, the algorithm, right?
Yeah.
So I'm dealing with that right now. I've had a couple videos hit in the last just week, which has been fun to like watch that. But again, it's a lot of work to maintain all that. But it's always interesting to hear people's journey into comedy, and everybody's is different. I mean, ours parallel and overlap at some points, but still different. And so, yeah, man, I appreciate you taking the time to share that. For those of you watching or listening, check out DrewDavisComedy.com. Lots of stuff there, lots of good stuff to get into. And then after you're done with that, check out MichaelHalcomb.live. Lots of good stuff there as well. Let's see what we're going to do as we transition out of this is we're going to go into part 2, but that's going to be available a few days later. So if you're watching this, give it a couple days, and you're gonna really enjoy the next part of this as well. Yeah, thanks, Drew, for taking a few minutes out here.
Thank you for giving me space to share about my own comedy experience, and then for us, this has been a great conversation. And thank you everyone who's listening to it's fun to connect with you all. So, but Michael, this is a really cool podcast, and if people don't hear me say it again at the next part, I definitely want to say thank you for letting us do this. This is cool.
Right on. So yeah, check out DrewDavis.comedy.com and stay tuned for part 2 of this. We're gonna stop here and say we hope that helps.
It's all messed up, yeah. Everything's messed up. We're going from this mess up to the next setup. Everything seems so messed up, but it's just our setup.